Exclusively on Secular Media Network, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.
Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto, your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. I am your host, Callie Wright, joined by my co-host, Ari Stillman. What's up, Ari?
I am filled with regret.
Oh, God. What'd you do this time?
It's what I didn't do, actually.
What?
Yesterday, in a town about an hour away from where I live, there was a free Smash Mouth concert.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
You're gonna regret that for the rest of your life. That's probably gonna be the last thing you think about on your deathbed.
I'm surprised that Zach didn't go because he loves to annoy me by singing All Star all the time.
God. Well, that's a sad story, and I feel bad for you. So this week we are gonna have a conversation that I've been wanting to have for a very, very long time, and other things have come up. We've had trouble getting schedules together with guests and that kind of thing. But one of the more recent controversies surrounding trans people is trans people in sports, transgender athletes. The obvious implication there being that trans women having their stereotypically male physiology have an inherent advantage because of years of testosterone and bone density and all that kind of stuff. So this is a conversation that I've wanted to have for quite some time, and I'm really, really excited to be having it today. Joanna Harper is a medical physicist in Oregon. Joanna, welcome.
Thank you. It's a lovely day here in Portland.
Oh, it is not here in Cincinnati, so I am envious. So let's get to know you a little bit. Tell us your story. You're an athlete?
Yes. I'm Canadian by birth, and I attended the University of Western Ontario in a city called London, about halfway between Toronto and Detroit. While I was there, I got 2 degrees in physics, and I was also a pretty good athlete. I was an all-Canadian cross-country runner, and I ran a 2:23 marathon while I was there. Many years later, I began my transition in 2004, and as part of that transition, I started hormone replacement therapy, which consists of testosterone blocker and estrogen. So I knew that I would get slower as a result of that, but I didn't understand, A, how much slower I would get and how quickly it would happen. Within weeks, I was markedly slower, and within 9 months, I was 12% slower than I had been earlier. And men run approximately 10 to 12% faster than women do over a wide variety of distances. So as a distance runner, I had lost my complete male advantage in less than a year of hormone therapy. And so as a scientist, this was very eye-opening to me. And
I'm assuming this was, keeping up with your regular training regimen, all the things that you're doing to keep yourself in shape. You didn't change any of that, right?
No, I trained the same as I had always been. I just got slower, a lot slower, quickly. And so, very, very surprising to me. But then I found that there were other trans women who went through precisely the same thing. And eventually, I wound up publishing a paper where I compared race times from 8 trans women before and after transition, and collectively, the 8 of us were equally as competitive before transition as after.
And so when you say equally competitive, what does that mean?
So there's a certain aging that goes on, so that there's a metric that's used worldwide in masters track competition called age grading. And so that's a method of comparing an athlete versus the very best time someone of their age and gender has performed. So, for instance, I have performed at approximately the 80% level compared to the very best of my age and gender for, let's just say, a very long time. Be generous to myself, but
right.
So using that metric, collectively, the age-graded performance that among the 200 races that the 8 of us put up over a long period of time was identical.
And is this comparing yourself to cis women athletes? Like, were you comparing
Yes.
how competitive you were, competing with men versus competing with women, and just using the numbers to say, like, well, I'm the same kind of competitive with women as I was with men pre and post transition. Is that what that means?
Well, it's compared to the very best woman or very best man, and
Gotcha.
to be truthful about it, especially in masters athletics, there is more depth in men's competition than in women's competition. There's actually a published paper showing that on average, masters competition is 3 times as competitive in men's competition versus women. So compared to the very best women my age, I'm there's a significant gap, the same relative gap as there was before. But in terms of placings within say a national ranking or something like that, there's only, say, 1/3 of the number of women between me and the very top woman as there had been before. So I'm more likely to win medals at national championships and that sort of thing now than before. But if you're comparing me to the very best women, it's a very similar sized gap to what I used to have between the very best men my age.
And I'm curious. I know this is obviously focused on running. Are you familiar with studies and work that's been done in other kinds of sports?
Well, as I say, there aren't any other studies on trans women. Mine is the only published study in history on transgender athletes. So there are no other. There are no other studies, and it's a shocking lack of data. And one of the things that the publication of my study and some of the things that have happened afterwards is I have attracted interest from international scientists who want to work with me on getting more data. So, hopefully my study took 7 years to get done. Hopefully the ones I'm working on one with a group in Spain and one with a group in England. And hopefully those studies will get done a little faster than 7 years. But as of right now, there is nothing else published. But I have, since then, I've seen data from triathletes, from rowers, and certainly there is a comparable amount of loss of athleticism, shall we say. It's not exactly the same sort of thing, but it's very similar. And I don't have enough of any group to complete a study at this point, but I'm working on it.
Gotcha. And so, let's talk about for a second, what's going on behind the scenes with hormone replacement therapy. And we've talked a little bit about sort of the physical effects and that kind of thing on the show before. And I know, just, speaking anecdotally, when I started hormone replacement therapy, I was, like you said, you were kind of surprised at how quickly it happened. And I was too. I was shocked because at the time I had a relatively physical job. I wasn't, hauling heavy stuff around all day, but I was carrying equipment up and down stairs and that kind of stuff. And yeah, it was a matter of weeks before I noticed, wow, this is a lot harder than it used to be.
And I had the exact same thing happen in the opposite direction.
Right, with testosterone.
Yeah. So
when you start taking hormones, can you kind of speak to medically what happens with that?
Well, when I say there's no study on trans athletes, there is a study that is related, and that was they took a Dutch group took 19 trans women and something like 17 trans men and followed them as they went through hormone replacement. And so testosterone levels for trans women after a year were lower than that for cis women, and hemoglobin levels were virtually identical for the two groups after a year of HRT. For trans men, they again got identical testosterone levels and identical hemoglobin levels to cis men. So it's not unexpected that you would see, marked physical changes. The hormones are extraordinarily powerful things, and they shape our bodies in many ways. And probably there's nobody who understands that more than trans people.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, what's the mechanism? Is it testosterone that builds muscle, and it's just because of that, or I'm trying to understand kind of the mechanics. If you can sort of explain that.
Testosterone is very important for muscle production and maintenance too. So, our muscles are continually renewing, but it is important to understand that I'm a physicist, and so I'm not necessarily the very best person to speak to the mechanisms. You might want to speak to someone more in medical realm.
Sure, that's fair. So what did you notice as far as when you got slower? Did training become harder? Were you able to do less with training? What? Just kind of speaking from personal experience there.
It's been 12 years, so but certainly I lost speed. I also lost the ability to recover as quickly. In non-running sort of way, I fatigued easier. I wasn't as strong. I couldn't lift as much. All of those things happened fairly quickly to me. And
so how I found out about this study is there was an article published in the Washington Post about a little over a year ago, that talks about your study. And one of the things that I really enjoyed reading, not because it's obviously an unpleasant experience, but it kind of it made things hit home when you said, "How slow would I need to be for them to be happy?"
No.
If I'm competing against a cisgender woman, she doesn't necessarily know how fast I used to be, but she only knows if I beat her, it seems unfair to her. And so it's kind of frustrating for me because, some people are saying, well, it's fine if you're allowed to compete as long as you don't actually beat me. Well, if I don't beat you, can I beat somebody else? And so it's any competitive woman feels it's unfair if I beat her. So the only way for it to be fair is for me to not beat anybody then. And it's frustrating as a competitor. But I understand that that's the way it is. But yeah, how slow would I need to be? Well, very slow. I need to not beat anybody in order for somebody to be happy.
Well, yeah, and one of the arguments that you always hear, in the unfair advantage thing, something that I always ask is, there are plenty of sports where trans women are allowed to compete. So why are they not at the very, very tops of all of the sports they compete in?
Right, and so my study only speaks to distance. Right?
Sure.
But you can use indirect methods of determining advantage, and certainly allow me to be very, very clear. Trans women do have advantages over cisgender women. On average, we're taller, and there are plenty of sports where height is an advantage. But trans women also have disadvantages with respect to cisgender women, and nobody ever mentions that. The analogy that I like to use is that it's like having a big car with a small engine competing against a small car with a small engine. So in many ways, the small car with the small engine is going to be able to outperform the big car with the small engine. And that's true in sports as well. But things like height, muscle mass, trans women lose a lot of muscle mass, but still on average have more muscle mass than the average women. So how does one correlate all of these advantages? Well, you can't in many sports. Because it's not like rowing or swimming or something like this where there's an objective measurement. But you can use an indirect method. You can compare the number of people doing well in a sport. For instance, in baseball, left-handed players have numerous advantages over right-handed baseball players. And anyone who has watched a baseball game knows this. In Major League Baseball, 30% of the players are left-handed versus 10% of the population. So that's a threefold overrepresentation of left-handers. And so that's indicative of the size of the advantage. The larger the overrepresentation, the larger the advantage. If you look at women's sports, let's say you look at the WNBA, basketball might well be the sport where trans women would have the most advantages. And yet, no trans woman has ever played in the WNBA. Trans women are underrepresented in the WNBA.
Do you happen to know if the WNBA prohibits that or not?
No, the WNBA actually has been very welcoming. There's one team in particular, the Los Angeles Sparks, that has actually gone looking to try to find a trans woman basketball player, and they haven't yet. And the truth of the matter is, trans women are so underrepresented in sports for sociological reasons and not for physical reasons. Certainly, there have to be trans women out there who could play in the WNBA. There is, in fact, one trans woman who's 7 feet tall, was a collegiate basketball player, a Division I basketball player. I would imagine that if she chose to, she could play in the WNBA. But imagine the hate that she would have to put up with. Right. I'm sure this woman chooses to live a quiet life rather than face all of the hate she would have to face as a 7-foot basketball player in the NBA, WNBA.
Well, yeah, I mean, the argument that I always try to throw back at people when they say things like that is like, so if a trans woman has an advantage because she's taller, so do abnormally tall cis women get disqualified as well? You know, right. if there's a cis woman that has an unusually large body frame or has an abnormally high level of testosterone that she didn't take drugs to get, that's just how she is naturally. I mean, do we disqualify these people? I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky thing. As I say, we let left-handers play against right-handed baseball players, but we don't let 200-pound boxers get into the ring with 130-pound boxers. So, at some advantage level, we do draw a line, and we do say, you are too advantaged to compete against the other category. And if there was evidence for that, I could support a rule in which the WNBA only allowed each team to have one trans woman on the court at a time. That would be a rule that wouldn't prohibit trans women from playing basketball, but would perhaps level the floor a little by not allowing trans women to take over the game. But given that there are 0 trans women in the whole league, the idea of limiting a team to one on the floor at the same time is so far away from reality that that's very unlikely to ever happen. But I do think it's important to understand that that some advantage is okay, but overwhelming advantage isn't. And drawing that line can sometimes be very tricky.
Hello, I'm Alan Cumming. Live Out Loud is calling on the LGBT community to help improve life for gay teens. Take what you know and gay it forward through the Homecoming Project, a chance to return to your old high school and share your story with LGBTQ youth. Your life experiences and wisdom can prove invaluable to teens who may be struggling with their own identities and paths in life. One day can make a lasting difference. Gay it forward with the Homecoming Project. Find us at liveoutloud.info to learn how you can get involved today.
Hi, this is Trav Mamone of the By Any Means podcast. The By Any Means podcast is a weekly show where I interview guests about the intersections of social justice and humanism. Just go to www.byanymeans.com, that's by spelled B-I, to hear the podcast and read the blog. Because, hey, aren't we all a little bi-curious?
Before we jump back into the show, it's time to thank our patrons. Big shout out this week to Cosmic Gypsy. Thank you so much for contributing to the show financially and for believing in us enough to support our mission to smuggle penises into women's restrooms and to force every American into their very own mandatory gay marriage. To find out more, head over to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto. Thank you. And do you have any thoughts on, just thinking about if you could, if you were to say, here's what I think the rules should be. Do you have a sense of what would make sense there?
Well, right now, I think the current IOC rule that I actually helped put together, I think is a wonderful rule. Trans women are allowed to compete in the Olympics if they've had a year of hormone therapy and if they say they're women, and that is it. And so until we see evidence that trans women are dominating sport, which is frankly will never happen in my lifetime and probably never will happen, then I don't think anything needs to be done more than that. But at the same time, I just would like to let people who are afraid of trans women taking over that I would not be adverse to there being some limits on trans women should it ever prove that trans women are taking over women's sport. And it's a long ways from reality, but it's not perhaps out of the realm of possibility that trans women could get overrepresented in certain sports.
And other sporting organizations where trans women are allowed to compete, are the rules similar? Like you identify as a woman and you've been on hormones for a year. I understand that there are some places where surgery is required. Is that accurate? Yes.
The IOC first allowed trans women, and that's the International Olympic Committee, first allowed trans women in 2004, and at that point they required surgery. And so most other sports that allowed trans women to compete copied or slightly modified the IOC rules from 2004. So most sports, including the one that I compete in, distance running, USATF, the governing body for track and field in this country, requires women to have surgery to compete, although they could compete in the Olympics without surgery, which is farcical. But so most sports that allow trans women still require surgery. And that new IOC rule needs to trickle down, and it needs to happen soon. And it is one of the things that I'm trying to work on.
And what's the thing? Is the thinking behind, having had surgery, you get rid of the organ that produces testosterone, regardless of, we can check your blood levels and see that you're, consistent or below what a cis woman's levels are. But is it just ignorance? The reason that rule exists, or?
It is, as you say, get rid of the organ that produces testosterone and then, then that will be better. But also in 2003, when they drew up this rule, most places in the world required trans women to have surgery in order to be legally recognized as women. And that was one of the things that also was stipulated in 2004. It required legal recognition of gender, and that's actually one of the things I'm proudest of the new IOC regulations, because the International Olympic Committee is a pretty conservative organization, but now they say we don't care if you're legally recognized as female or as male for that matter. Compete in the gender you want to compete in, as long as your hormone levels are equal to that of your target gender.
Very cool. And so I'm curious, we've spent a lot of time talking about, trans feminine folks and, hormone replacement therapy to lower testosterone levels. But speaking for trans masculine folks, the thing that was in the news recently is Chris Mosier in the Nike ad. And he's an elite athlete. And so I'm curious, and obviously this is probably not your personal experience, and I'm just curious if you've heard or, know anything about the experience of trans masculine folks. I mean, are there similar worries? I mean, because I feel like if we're following this logic, then we would assume trans masculine folks would be at an inherent disadvantage.
That's right. And certainly, again, there are sports like basketball where trans men are going to be at an inherent disadvantage. But I think that trans men can be competitive in a number of sports. And Chris, he competed in a U.S. uniform in the duathlon just in June. Skylar Baylor is the only out Division I trans athlete, and Skylar swims for the Harvard men's swimming team. So the only Division I trans athlete that we know of is a trans man. So yes, trans men definitely can be competitive against men, and in many sports it's going to take a while to build up the muscle mass that's necessary, and it takes a certain amount of work. But there are some trans men who, they're pretty hot dudes. They've got some face, and I don't know if you are familiar with Balian Buschbaum, but he's a German guy, and he was 6th in the Olympic pole vault in 2000. And he is very well known in Germany, but he's now a pole vault coach, and he is he's really hot, he was good looking as a woman too, but he's even better looking as a man, and so yes, it may take a while for trans men to build up the necessary musculature to be competitive in many sports. But yes, they can be.
Well, and I'm a little curious because, speaking of general society, obviously when people think of transgender, they're generally thinking of trans women. And in society, largely trans masculine folks simply don't exist, which is awful. But I'm curious if you're, are you aware that there's a similar opposition to trans men competing in sport?
No, again, because, the people who are opposed to trans women think that trans women are, quote unquote, really men, right?
Right.
And so the same people think that trans men are really women. So, if you want to compete against the guys, go ahead, dude, have at it, is pretty much the, the prevailing thought. And you mentioned about the invisibility of trans men. I have over the last year become fairly well known, and there are definitely times where invisibility would look pretty good to me. But there is not the same sort of opposition to trans men competing in men's competition, but there is sort of a disdain, I would say, towards trans men, and it's,
I can see why they would allow transmasculine people or trans men into men's sports because they actually might be at a disadvantage. There's not a threat there that they would unfairly, they would unfairly upset the balance of power or whatever, because a lot of people don't know, but when you take testosterone as a person who's assigned female at birth, it doesn't actually affect your estrogen level at all. You still have the same amount of estrogen that you did unless you have a hysterectomy.
Right.
So there might even though they would have the same amount of testosterone as, a cis guy, they would also have the same amount of estrogen as a typical cis woman.
Yes, as you say, unless there's a hysterectomy involved. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
So one of the bigger controversies surrounding athletes in trans sports is around Fallon Fox in the UFC, and I know obviously your study is on distance running. You're a runner.
No, I know.
I'm curious.
I've studied Fallon, and I know her story very well.
Oh,
so
great. So, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about, the applicability of all of this to combat sports, because I've seen conversations where some people are like, well, in some sports, I'm fine with it. In combat sports, it's different because of bone structure and so on and so forth. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that whole thing.
Well, so the bone structure thing. Okay, so trans women do lose bone density, but it happens very, very slowly. And in fact, to any of the trans women out there listening, be careful about bone density, because later in life it can become a real problem for trans women. But the loss of bone density is very slow. And so, yes, it is probably true that Fallon Fox has heavier, denser bones than her competitors. And for instance, this could provide a certain protective advantage. It's also, a frame to hang larger muscles on. But boxing is split into weight categories. And so carrying around heavier, denser bones is not a good idea, and it's not the most efficient use of body mass. So within her weight category, if she has these heavier bones, then she can't carry more of the good stuff for fighting, which there's more important things than heavier bones. Plus, it's certainly possible that she could have a fatigue disadvantage. And one of the things in her fights is that you could see that later in her fights, she had problems versus some of her opponents. And so, this may well be a disadvantage that she has. So, the idea that, heavier bones, it must make it unfair, is kind of silly. And I think if you watch her fights, and I've watched all her fights, you can see that against her better competitors, it's a very, very fair fight. And in fact, her one loss at this lower level, she's in sort of the minor leagues of MMA, but it's a picture that I show a lot of times. And there's Fallon Fox is at the weigh-in with her opponent, and her opponent is slightly taller, somewhat more masculine looking, and I say, so which of these two is the trans woman? And people who don't know inevitably pick the cis woman as being the trans woman. And so, the idea that, it must be unfair. And yet you look at these two women, and frankly, I wouldn't want to get in the ring with either of them. But,
right.
You say, well, this is not an unfair fight. And then if you watch most of her fights, they don't look unfair. And now, to be perfectly honest, in her very last fight, she did fight someone who was overmatched towards the end of her fights, and she hasn't fought in 2 years because of this last fight. Fallon hurt her opponent. Again, if you watch the fight, you can see, well, it's not like Fallon is such an amazing fighter. This other woman just wasn't prepared, and the referee did not stop the fight in time. And so, it's an unfortunate thing, but as a result of that, Fallon hasn't been able to get fights. So people will always point to this one fight, but if they watch the fight, they see, well, this other woman had no business being in the ring. And to give a counter example, I know a trans woman here in Portland who's a collegiate rower, but she also plays rugby in the summers. And this summer she was playing in a women's rugby league tournament, and she suffered a concussion. And none of the cis women in the rugby tournament suffered a concussion. So one would say, well, gee, maybe we need to protect those trans women from those cis women. Obviously, those cis women are too tough for trans women. They're hurting our gals, right?
Right.
So combat sports inherently pose a risk, but I don't think that it is unfair to allow trans women into contact sports.
And so, kind of putting it all together here, I mean, just as an athlete, because I used to be an athlete in school, and there's the camaraderie and the personal achievement and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, do you feel like you're part of the community as a trans woman? I mean, is being a part of the community something you're even interested in? I guess I should ask that. But I mean, do you feel like you're really part of the group?
Yeah. So I've belonged to the same running club for almost 20 years, and so the first 7 or 8 of those years, I was competing in the men's category, and then people got to watch me transition, and people now see me as a trans woman, and so there certainly are people, women in particular, in Portland who have not been very supportive of me, but my club in general has been very supportive, and one of the things that I will always treasure is a male friend in the club said to me, not everyone is thrilled about the changes you've made in your life, but there are plenty of people in this club who have your back, and you never have to worry about that. And that's a pretty wonderful thing to hear. So yes, the camaraderie in sports is great, and I am, for the most part, a well-respected member of the Portland running community. I went running this morning in one of the more popular places to run, and number of people, hey Joanna, and it's that sort of camaraderie is very important to me, and to any athlete. It is one of the major benefits of being an athlete, and so I think it's important to try to be inclusive.
That's so awesome, because I would imagine were you? Let me ask this: knowing the people that were involved, was that a worry that you had, or did you kind of have an idea like, it's probably not going to be universally popular, but I'll probably be okay? I mean, was there the fear there, or how did that factor?
Yeah, there was a little bit of fear, and especially early on, so many of the guys that I used to run with turned their backs on me, and then the women weren't necessarily very supportive of me either. But there was a core group of people that were supportive of me, and largely in my club. They saw me get slower. They understood this. They also I give back to the running community in a number of ways, and that's appreciated. And so, it's been a plus and minus thing, but yes, I absolutely had fears, and some of them came true. But for the most part, I've gotten a lot of support from the running community here in Portland.
where Saskatchewan is? Probably not. It's in Canada. If you do, you might know a city named Regina. In Regina, there's a studio. And in that studio, there are, at least once a month, a bunch of skeptical atheist geeks and goofballs who get together to do a podcast. We are the Brainstorm Crew, and we're trying to help spread a bit of reason and critical thinking while still having fun. Never taking things too seriously, but still not accepting everything we're told. We go through different topics, exploring them in depth, and often disagreeing. We try to stick to provable facts, and we never trust in myth. That's why we say we're woo-free since 2013. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Spreaker under Brainstorm, or check out our website, brainstormblog.net. I can't promise you'll always agree with us, but I can promise you'll have fun listening to us.
I've struggled with confidence throughout my life, and I've struggled with shame and internalized transphobia and internalized racism and internalized classism. And so I have all that stuff, but there was something in me believed I had something special. Telling the truth to myself about myself is awesome because it's just a relief, because I don't have to try to be something I'm not. I can just be. Who you are authentically is all right. The shame is what kills you. Believing that you are unworthy of love and belonging, that who you are authentically is a sin or is wrong, is deadly. Who you are is beautiful and amazing. It's important with all of the messages that might tell you otherwise, that you have that in yourself to say that I am beautiful, I'm smart, and I'm amazing.
So, moving forward, what changes would you like to see? I mean, is it just, rules and inclusion? I mean, what would you like to see if you could, if you could kind of mastermind a change in sporting culture and sporting community? What would that look like for you?
A quota.
A quota.
Yeah, right. I would certainly like to see every space be as welcoming of trans athletes as my running club is. I've had other trans runners visit and stay with me and go for group runs, and they've been very welcome by my club. And I don't ever say, "Oh, this is my trans friend from Ohio," or "This is my trans friend from," but people can figure so, and the sort of welcoming that my club has been is something I would like to see universally. And there are sports where this is true. I don't know if you know anything about roller derby, but roller derby has become a very welcoming space for trans athletes in general. And in fact, the Roller Derby Association had rules similar to the new IOC rules, in other words, a year of hormones. And in 2015, they decided those rules weren't inclusive enough. And so the Women's Flat Track Derby Association, I believe is the acronym, in 2015 put in a new rule that basically said, if you want to come play women's roller derby, come play. We don't care. And so it is, a very welcoming space. They say, if you want to compete in women's roller derby, you're welcome to play here. And so there are trans men, trans women, genderqueer, whatever terms you want to use, playing in roller derby, and they've been very welcome. And so, that sort of welcoming in a sport is something that would be great to see universally.
I'm curious if you think that there is even really a need for splitting sports among by gender. I understand that women tend to have a certain, skill set and physical ability, and men tend to have that as well. But there's always crossover. So wouldn't it just make more sense just to have people compete against people at their same level, regardless of gender?
I've heard this one a lot. And so let me give you an example from my sport. Tirnesh Dababa is perhaps arguably the greatest women's distance runner in history. And her 10,000 meter best time is just under 30 minutes, which is a phenomenal time for anybody. But it's 3 minutes slower than her husband runs. Now, her husband is also a world-class runner, but still, it shows the sort of disparity. So let's say you were to divide a 10K race, and you were to have two categories in the Olympics, an A category and a B category. And so you use some time cutoff for the A and B divisions. Mm-hmm. If you use, say, 30 minutes, there's only, 5 women in history who've run under that. And they would be swamped by the men who are capable of running 27 minutes. So the very best women in the world would be, at the very back of this A category. And then if you say the next group, the group that would dominate in the B category, are people who would run between 30 and 31 minutes. And 90% of those would be men. So you divide two categories, and one is, virtually all male with a very handful of females at the very back of the group. And the other one is still 90% men. And occasionally a woman would win the B race, but only very occasionally. Let's say you put the mark at 40 minutes. Then you'd have a more even distribution in the B group. It wouldn't be 90%, 10%. It would be, probably 70% male, 30% female. But still, it would be, most of the time men would win the B group. But then you've got one race that goes in 27 minutes and another race that goes in 40 minutes. And just looking at the two races, well, why would anybody even watch the B race? Why would anybody care? You think that, Tirnesh Dababa has made a wonderful living as a female athlete. And so doing that would mean the end of women's sports. And I would say that women's sports is one of the most important things in the development of women as equals. And so dividing it by any other means would spell pretty much the end of women's sports, and that would be a huge shame.
Gotcha. So the argument's not so much that we're talking about the difference in skill sets, because obviously that factors in, but at that point, we're also talking about the fact that, if we did it that way, women would never be elevated to, to be thought of as elite athletes or to be, leaders in those categories. They'd never get the sponsorships, they'd never get the recognition and that kind of stuff. So it's important from a social aspect too.
Right. And as another example, a non-running example, the Australian women's football, by which they mean soccer team, recently played, and they're one of the better squads in the world. They recently played a game against their men's under 15 team. So the very best women in the country of Australia against the very best under 15 boys. The under 15 boys won 7-0. Yeah. So, splitting sports any other way means the end of women's sports, and that would be a huge shame.
Very cool. Well, I again want to thank you for your time. Thanks for thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for educating us, and thanks for doing that study and for pushing the IOC and the other stuff that you do. We appreciate it.
Okay, it's been my pleasure. Nice talking to you.
And that, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto on Secular Media Network. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at GaytheistCali. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheists.
Hey everybody, this is your pal, Homestar Wano.
Oh my god.
I bet you haven't seen me since 2007, and I'm here to tell you about my hero, Ollie Stillman. Ollie is funnier than Strong Bad, smarter than the Cheat, cooler than Pom Pom, and has a more distinctive, captivating aroma than the Poop Smith. If I were Ollie Stillman, I would run around in circles screaming, "Yay, I'm Ollie Stillman, lavish me in praise." And I would have arms to wave over my head as I did so that would also be nice. Have you been to Ollie Stillman's Facebook page? I went there once, and let me tell you, reading those status updates while drinking a tall, refreshing glass of melonade and indulging in a jumbo bag of fluffy puff marshmallows is one heck of a way to spend a lazy summer afternoon. Oh, one time, Coach Z and Bubs were arguing over what to get the King of Town for Decemberween, so I gave them Ollie's email address, olliestillman4@gmail.net. .com. And they used Strongbad's computer to send them an email, and they decided together that the King of Town didn't deserve a Decemberween present after all because of the time that he ate Strongsad's hopes and dreams. Oh man, I just can't get enough Ollie. So when I'm on the train to Whichway to pick up some hefty bags for marzipan, I listen to the spin-off show with Jeremiah Twagel, the SJW Circle Joke. And that is why you should vote Ollie Stillman for Supreme Overlord of Petting Animals or whatever. Okay, bye!
You win. Oh my god, I can't.
There's a big chunk of people who are not going to get that, and a big chunk of people who are going to think that I'm
who are literally laying on the floor dying laughing right now. Oh my dear sweet god, I did not see that coming. Whew, okay.
It's one of my better impressions.
Yeah, no, it was great. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/thegaytheistmanifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. If that doesn't work, you can also head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That helps us get heard by lots more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gay Theist Manifesto.